evolving multimedia journalists known as VJs that shoot, edit, produce, and blog their own news content have become the new face of broadcast television in American media. It has become a popular model for newsrooms across the country, saving money and gathering news at a faster rate. A daunting task for news organizations to stay afloat with their biggest competition, the internet, as advertising sales take a crucial downturn in this recession. Tonight I report from Washington to take an in-depth look at how this revolution challenges the quality and accuracy of news content. Newsrooms across the country are making the switch from traditional reporters to backpack journalists, better known as VJs, one-bands, or community reporters that shoot and edit their own material.
If you work with someone long enough, you kind of connect, you understand what they shot and why, and it works out. But usually reporters work with a different photographer every day, and it's really hard to get two people thinking the same way about a story.
When I think about WSA, what we're trying to do is generate more stories. If you take easy math, if I have 10 photographers and 10 reporters and they all go out together, it means I get 10 stories. Versus if I have 20 journalists, I have the opportunity to get 20 stories, and I have the opportunity for the coverage to lead for what we're doing, rather than numbers to lead what we're doing.
Complete coverage in the newsroom means that meteorologists are taking on the task of transforming into one-bands and have to produce weather stories.
More people that work in the weather departments have to start reporting as well. Most of the time, if you have a degree in meteorology, you're just doing weather. But now they're really going to want people to start multitasking. So meteorologists who had never done stories before, never gone out and reported before, will probably start doing that at many TV stations.
According to the Association Electronic Journalists 2008 survey, local news on TV grew a record amount of 4.6 hours per weekday, while 1,200 employees lost their jobs, accounting for 4.3%. That percentage has nearly doubled this year alone. News Channel 8, Brianne Carter and Mike Conan had to transform into community reporters.
I got into this business for the love of writing. So when you have to focus on everything else, as well as making sure that the person is in focus in your video, making sure that they look the right color that they should look and they're not blue or orange, when you're focusing on that, it's much harder to focus on the story at hand.
I think it's easier for me to one-man band because you do have control over everything you do.
That means complete control of content that has some wondering ethically how this change will impact news.
For backpack journalists in television, there's obviously a lot more to do, and so time becomes a real issue. And when there's a time crunch, things can slip through the cracks.
Deborah Potter, executive director of NewsLab, says the stations won't go back, so everyone needs to adjust to this change.
We had an evolution from film to videotape. And there were a lot of cameramen, mostly men in those days, who shot film and who looked at this new videotape monster and said, I'll never learn it. And the truth is they got out of the business. And others looked at it and said, wow, look what we can do in editing and how much easier it's going to be. And they took to it immediately.
Veteran news anchor and reporter Bruce Johnson remembers when television stations sent close to 6 employees on one story.
A sound man. You had a light man, you had a cameraman, that's 3 guys, then you had the reporter. Today, you've got one person doing all of those jobs.
With all these changes, Bruce Johnson says that veterans are taking buyouts or even early retirement.
A lot of older reporters just can't do it. They're afraid of the technology, they don't want to learn the new skills, they feel there isn't enough time, and a lot of them just think it's unfair.
Those things that we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, in what we have to tell the public, that remains the same. How we tell them, that's the thing that's changing. And you wonder if you're telling them enough.
It's an extraordinary time.
Independent journalist, documentary filmmaker, and professor at American University, Bill Gentile, was one of the pioneers of backpack journalism.
Guys go out there with a wide-angle lens and spray everything in the world, and they get back to the editing room and they pray to God there's something there that's usable. This is not backpack journalism. Backpack journalism is the craft which is practiced by a properly trained professional who knows how to go out there and make the images. I mean, images are the driving force in this whole craft. There's a reason why they call this stuff television.
But newsrooms aren't the only ones seeking change. Sports network ESPN cut nearly 100 jobs to create new ones called digital correspondents. Cable network Comcast Sportsnet is following in their footsteps, but hasn't had to cut any jobs.
To launch a whole digital media partnership. We have a unique partnership with the Redskins. It's so unique. I think we're the only ones that have to the extent with a professional team in football or anything.
This change might mean good news for television stations, but bad news for college students entering the job market.
What's the likelihood percentage of them actually getting a job? Is it 40%, 60%? Are we talking
1%.
1%. And why is that?
Because the top 10 markets are the target. So people who've been laid off from the network are going to try to come to the top 10 markets. People who are trying to grow their career are trying to grow up to the top 10 markets.
That 1% accounts for college students like Andrew Smith, who landed an entry-level position as a weekend production assistant.
The entry-level positions are still going to be behind the scenes, doing stuff like production assistants or maybe like associate producers, stuff like that. It looks that they want about still 1 to 3 years before you can go on air. But I think if you're good enough, especially doing this backpack stuff, because the older journalists, they're not used to that. So if you've really got your stuff together, I think you'd still have a chance.
One-man bands can be a tedious task for complicated stories that require 2 or more persons. That's why newsrooms like WUSA 9 have developed a system that allows stations to send out more than one person on a story. But multimedia journalism is nothing new. In fact, stations like WJLA, ABC 7 followed this type of model years ago before returning to traditional models. In Washington, I'm Deborah Green for 9 News Now and WUSA9.com.